On this Saturday night, nowhere to run. Palestinians flee Gaza's largest hospital as Israel widens its offensive. Plus, the pain and suffering after a blast at a UN-run school sheltering civilians. Also tonight, bombshell revelations. A new report claims one of the two Michaels is seeking a multi-million-dollar settlement from Ottawa.
He is making some serious allegations.
Why Michael Spavor is blaming Michael Kovrig for his arrest in China. And the Black Battalion.
They were proud of what they did. They came back and they were functioning in oblivion.
More than a century later, Canada's only all-black unit to serve in the First World War receives a special honor.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Israel is expanding its ground offensive in the heart of Gaza and has reportedly ordered the immediate evacuation of the Strip's largest hospital. Hundreds have been forced to flee as Israeli forces continue searching Al-Shifa hospital. They claim a secret Hamas command center lies underneath, something Hamas has repeatedly denied. Multiple blasts were reported across the Strip today, including a United Nations-run school where hundreds were believed to be sheltering. Mike Armstrong has our top story tonight and a warning: you may find the video disturbing.
It is an accusation denied by the Israeli military. But of the people fleeing Gaza City Saturday, some were healthcare workers. They say they were forced out of Al-Shifa hospital by Israeli defense forces, given 1 hour to leave. Dr. Ramez Radwa says what was Gaza's biggest hospital now has just a team of nurses and a single surgeon. Everyone else, he says, was forced to evacuate Al-Shifa. Now, according to the Hamas-run health ministry, about 500 patients left at gunpoint. From a high of about 1,500 patients, it now holds only 125. People are dead and nobody buries them, says Mahad Bahith. There's no food or drink, and the shooting goes on 24 hours a day. Now, the IDF has been inside Shifa since Thursday and says it didn't push anyone out. Troops just helped people leave because they were asked to by the hospital administrator.
That is what we've coordinated throughout the day, and we've seen people leaving at those that can.
Now, airstrikes in the north continue. This is video of the aftermath of a reported strike Saturday on a UN school being used as a shelter. The Palestinian Health Ministry says at least 50 people were killed. The Israeli military continues to tell Gazans the south is safer. Well, it's also hitting what it considers military targets in the south. Health officials say this strike on a house killed 15. There were 2 rockets, according to this man, in an area he says Israel tells the world is safe. Gazan officials say since the beginning of this conflict, the death toll is now over 12,000, a number the United Nations says is credible, but there are also the injured, about 30,000. This man says there were about 80 people in a building that was hit in Khan Yunis. Many of them were people who had left the north. Now, there are new warnings about that city. Israeli officials are urging civilians to leave. They say Hamas fighters may now be holed up there, and people should move west, something observers say could point to an Israeli ground offensive in that area. The Israeli Prime Minister Saturday night said his troops will go wherever they have to get Hamas fighters. People in the south, he said, will understand that soon enough. Benjamin Netanyahu was also asked about Hamas leadership outside the Gaza Strip, living in places like Qatar and Lebanon. He said all members of Hamas, even outside Gaza, he considers dead men. Jeff?
Mike Armstrong in Jerusalem. Thanks, Mike. And there are growing fears that fighting along Israel's border with Lebanon could spark a wider Mideast conflict. Israel's defense forces and Iran-backed Hezbollah traded rocket fire again today. According to reports, Israel's latest attack hit an aluminum factory 15 kilometers from the border. That's the deepest strike inside Lebanon since the Hamas attack. The Israeli government is facing criticism from its own people, afraid for the more than 200 hostages believed to be held by Hamas. Family members of the missing were joined by tens of thousands of protesters as they finished a 5-day march from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. They're demanding the government do more to secure the hostages' release. They fear Israel's siege is jeopardizing the lives of their loved ones. Turning to other news now, and a new bombshell revelation in the case of the two Michaels, the Canadians detained in China for nearly 3 years accused of spying. A new report from the Globe and Mail, citing unnamed sources, says Michael Spavor is seeking a multi-million-dollar settlement from Ottawa. According to the report, Spavor claims he was an unwitting victim, and he blames the Canadian government and Michael Kovrig for his detention. A standing ovation for the two Michaels following their release from Chinese prisons a couple of years ago. Ottawa claimed they were political pawns, detained following the arrest of a Chinese tech executive, Meng Wanzhou, in Vancouver. But according to the Globe and Mail, Spavor's lawyers are telling a different story. Long before his arrest, the entrepreneur had moved to China and was working to drum up investments in North Korea.
This way, passports here.
In 2013, Spavor made headlines when he helped to facilitate a trip to the Hermit Kingdom for American basketball star Dennis Rodman. That led to Spavor's unlikely friendship with North Korea's reclusive dictator Kim Jong-un. It's alleged that Spavor later recounted his experiences to fellow Canadian expat Michael Kovrig over drinks. According to the Globe report, Spavor's lawyers allege that unbeknownst to him, Kovrig then shared that intelligence with officials in Ottawa and in Beijing, which ultimately led to Spavor's arrest.
It's such an immense relief to be back in Canada.
Kovrig was working as a diplomat at the Canadian Embassy in Beijing, and in 2017 joined an independent global think tank, the International Crisis Group. The federal government says Kovrig was not a spy and has never worked for CSIS. Diplomatic officers are tasked with collecting information on security in countries of strategic importance, but they are not meant to conduct covert operations. A government spokesperson told Global News perpetuating the notion that either Michael was involved in espionage is only perpetuating a false narrative under which they were detained by China. Joining us now from Montreal is Guy Saint-Jacques, who was Canada's former ambassador to China between 2012 and 2016. Mr. Saint-Jacques, thank you so much for joining us. Nice to see you. Let's start first with your reaction to the revelations we've learned today.
Well, I knew that there were ongoing negotiations taking place in Ottawa. I know that those with Michael Kovrig were settled some time ago. I didn't know exactly where the negotiations were with Mr. Spavor, but of course he is making some serious allegations, and I must say that based on my experience, I don't think it's the full story.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that the Mr. Spavor was watched by the Chinese security people, and the reason for this is that China considers North Korea as its backyard, and here is a foreigner, a Canadian, who has a very close access to the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, something that no Chinese has, and for that there was a bit of jealousy or concern of how influential Mr. Spavor could be. And from my perspective, I think this is the main reason why he was arrested by the Chinese.
As noted, Mr. Kovrig worked at the embassy there at around the same time as your tenure. Was Mr. Kovrig a CSIS agent?
No, not at all. In fact, he was a good political officer, and there is an important distinction with spying work and political reporting work. Diplomats that are assigned to political sections abroad are charged with doing political reporting. Of course, in a country like China, it's very difficult to have access to good information because it's so opaque. And Michael being able to travel around, I'm sure that anyone at the embassy would have been interested to hear what he had learned during his trips. And Michael Kovrig was very open about this, that this was not done in secret.
Guy Saint-Jacques, Canada's former ambassador to China, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
The fallout continues from a global news investigation with allegations that Canada has become a safe haven for hundreds of people connected to the Iranian regime. They're accused of threatening Canadians, prompting calls for the federal government to respond. Mercedes Stephenson joins me now from the annual Global Security Summit in Halifax. Hi, Mercedes. So what's been the reaction there to how Canada is handling this threat?
Well, Jeff, folks here are concerned about the Iranian regime and its influence all around the world, from Canada to the United States to the UK. There are worries that Iran is not just using proxies in places like the Middle East through Hamas and Hezbollah, but that they are also involved in trying to intimidate, threaten, potentially even kidnap or kill Canadian, American, and UK citizens. I sat down with Masih Alinejad. She's a very prominent human rights expert from Iran who previously spoke to Global News. And I asked her about the Prime Minister's response to our reporting, where he said that essentially the government is doing all they can to try to deal with Iran and will continue to try to do so. She had a pretty strong message for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
You know, these are cliche and empty words. And Prime Minister Trudeau, I want to use this camera and talk to you directly. Don't be scared of me and women like, you and critical journalists and Iranian Canadians in Canada. We love Canada. We love peace and security and democracy. We love Canada to be a shelter for, decent people. And you're putting the lives of Canadians in danger. So I want to meet you. That's all I can say, because otherwise he's going to come up with a lot of empty words saying that we stand with the people of Iran. No, please sit down and make decisions. How to protect human rights, how to protect democracy in Canada. That's very important.
Some Iranian regime critics have suggested, Jeff, that Canada needs to criminalize the IRGC. Right now, there are rules to prevent those officials from entering Canada, but it is not listed as a terror entity. That's one of the things that many Iranian expats say they'd like to see happen. Mercedes Stephenson in Halifax tonight. Thanks. And you can hear more about this tomorrow morning on the West Block. That's right here on Global. National security officials are investigating reports a BC company's drone detection technology was sold to Russia in violation of sanctions. According to Ukrainian and Russian media reports, the equipment from Vancouver-based Skyscope Technologies was recently acquired by a Moscow university. The anti-drone system can detect hundreds of different types of drones at long distances. Skyscope Technologies denies violating sanctions. Paying the mortgage. Coming up, some much-needed good news for Canadian homeowners. SpaceX's Starship roared into the sky this morning before it was intentionally destroyed mid-flight. The nearly 400-foot rocket ran into trouble minutes after takeoff. One of its boosters exploded over the Gulf of Mexico. Mission Control lost contact moments later, saying the rocket's onboard system destroyed the vehicle. This was the Starship's second test launch. Its April attempt also ended in failure. SpaceX's owner, Elon Musk, also owns X, formerly Twitter, of course, and the billionaire is now facing backlash for supporting an anti-Semitic post. Several major brands, including Apple and Disney, are now pausing ads on his social media platform after a report from a media watchdog group found ads next to tweets praising Hitler and the Nazis. Musk is now threatening to sue that group, along with all those who colluded in what Musk says is a fraudulent attack on the company. Well, if you're one of the millions of Canadians feeling the pain from high interest rates, some economists believe relief could be on the way. 5-year fixed-rate mortgages are already beginning to dip slightly, with borrowing costs expected to fall further in the coming years. Promising news for some, but for those with mortgages up for renewal, that relief may not come soon enough. Heather Yourex-West explains.
For $1.4 million, you could be the next owner of this downtown Vancouver condo. A deal as the city's normally overheated housing market starts to cool.
Obviously, everyone's aware that the interest rates have completely impacted the market. It's starting to increase now, but it was definitely the last 3 months have been a little bit on the slower side in comparison to previous years.
It's not just clients looking to sell. The soaring interest rates have Catanzaro reevaluating her own investments too. She had been renting out a revenue property in Calgary, but the costs were just too high.
So as an investor personally, I ended up selling my property in Calgary just recently, just a few months ago.
Mortgage rates for Canadians who are trying to pay off their house have climbed dramatically over the last year and a half.
Anyone with a variable rate mortgage knows this pain all too well, but those with locked-in mortgages will come to know it soon. In 2021, a 5-year fixed rate could be as low as 1.4%. Today, even a discounted rate is well over 5%.
Canadian households are paying an additional $65 billion a year already from higher interest rates, and that total will probably grow as more Canadians have their mortgages renewed.
The interest rate hikes have caused housing costs, including rents, to soar, giving Canadians less money to spend and fuel inflation. Enough that a growing number of economists now believe we've seen high mortgage rates reach their peak. And over the next few years, some relief is on the way.
But we're not going to go back down to levels that we saw early in the pandemic boom. And Canadians probably got to get comfortable with normal mortgage rates being something around, like, let's say 3.5% or 4%.
Numbers that may put home ownership out of reach for some. The days of borrowing debt dirt cheap behind us. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Argentina at a crossroads still ahead, the divisive presidential election with high stakes for the country's economy. Welcome back. Argentina is preparing to head to the polls in what looks like a close election to decide the country's next president. There are two choices, a controversial far-right libertarian and the country's finance minister. As Mike Drolet reports, whoever wins will need to sort out an economy on the brink.
Argentina has found itself at a political crossroads, and it couldn't be more contentious or volatile. It's incredible that there is no freedom, screamed the supporter of Javier Milei, the former TV host turned far-right libertarian who has galvanized his supporters with props, using a chainsaw to symbolize the cuts he's going to make to government, while working his supporters into a frenzy at his rock star-like rallies. Long live freedom, damn it, has become his populist catchphrase, which pushed him to second place in last month's first round of voting, surprising many political pundits. And what a contrast he is from his opponent. Gracias. Sergio Massa, the established centrist politician who won the first round of voting. But as Minister of Finance, he's seen inflation rise almost 150% on his watch, sending 4 in 10 Argentinians under the poverty line. The polls show the election is now too close to call, and the choice for some isn't a choice at all. This man says he's not voting. Neither of them, he says, represents the interests I have for the future of the country. What seems certain is that tough times are ahead for a country that's been edging towards a financial catastrophe for years. Economists see no other way out than strict austerity measures, which could negatively impact other South American countries. And Argentinians will have to decide who they trust more to guide them through it, the status quo in Massa or the chainsaw-wielding Milei. A tough choice the country can't afford to get wrong. Mike Drolet, Global News.
A Taylor Swift fan has died after collapsing during sweltering conditions at a concert in Rio de Janeiro on Friday. The 23-year-old's cause of death is not known, but reports say fans were not allowed to take water inside the open-air stadium, despite a record-breaking heat wave. In a handwritten note on Instagram, Swift says she's devastated, calling the victim far too young. Honoring the Black Battalion, next, paying tribute to Canada's only all-black unit of the First World War. Canada's only all-black unit to serve during the First World War faced much prejudice throughout the conflict. Well, now, more than a century later, Canada's Defence Minister has announced a new initiative to honour the Black Battalion. Megan King has the details.
This is a significant moment that some of us never expected to ever see.
A monumental day in the history and legacy of the No. 2 Construction Battalion, remembering the brave men who had to fight for their right to serve.
Canadians Black Canadians over a century ago wanted to serve, were quite prepared to lay down their lives for their country. And when they stepped forward to serve, they were turned away. And it's important for us to remember why they were turned away.
They were proud of what they did. They came back and they were functioning in oblivion. They weren't heardable. They weren't celebrated.
Blair announcing $2.25 million in funding towards educating the public on the history behind the battalion and honoring its memory.
Today's announcement speaks to their perseverance, and it also speaks to the important aspect of us not forgetting their legacy.
There's still a fair part of this country and internationally who never heard of No. 2 Construction Battalion. So the more that we can do these things, the more people know about it.
In addition to the funding, the Black Cultural Center was presented with the first No. 2 Construction Battalion camp flag for commemoration.
The fact that, you know, this battalion served and never had an identification camp flag, and the fact that that wrong has been rewritten, and today we have something that we can be proud of as a symbol of those brave men.
This event follows a formal apology to the descendants of battalion members by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau back in July 2022, at which point he acknowledged the systemic anti-Black racism the battalion's 600 members faced before, during, and long after the war.
All Canadians deserve to know the truth of our history. We need to learn from that truth so that we can build a more inclusive country for the next generation.
Megan King, Global News, Cherrybrook, Nova Scotia.
And that is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight's Your Canada is the Thompson River near Spence's Bridge, BC. We love seeing Your Canada, so please keep emailing your photos to viewers at globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope you'll join us again here tomorrow. Have a great night.